Before I start this video, I would like to state two things. The first is that this topic kind of deals with sensitive material. So if mass shootings or guns or anything like that is sensitive to you, then please click away now. And the second is that I don't think in any way whatsoever video game violence causes real world violence. It's stupid and ridiculous to think so. There's so many studies that prove that there is no relation there, so I'm not diving into that topic at all. Alright, and with that, let's get started. On February 14th, 2018, a shooter opened fire in a Florida school with an AR-15, killing 17 and injuring a further 14. This is another in a far too long line of horrific tragedies and mass shootings in the United States of America. So what makes this one different? Why am I talking about this on a video game channel? Well, to begin with, this latest shooting seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of companies, many of whom have now publicly cut ties to the National Rifle Association of America. The list contains some interesting major brands such as Hertz, Delta Airlines, and MetLife, all of which offer discounts to NRA members. Nowhere on any list are video game companies listed, and not because those ties don't exist, but they keep them as close to the chest as possible. Now, you may be wondering, what do video game companies, specifically the AAA ones, have to do with the NRA? In 1997, Martin Hollis, director at Rare Studios, involved with the GoldenEye game adaptation, wanted to bring a new sense of realism to the shooter genre. Before Hollis took this initiative, very few games had attempted to put real depictions of guns into a digital space. Late into GoldenEye's development cycle, producer Ken Lobb called Hollis to inform him that legally they couldn't use the real gun names, resulting in James Bond carrying an arsenal of realistic, at least for the time, looking guns with made-up names. This is all detailed in a fantastic Eurogamer piece from 2013 about the relationship between video game companies and gun manufacturers, where Simon Parkin writes about how companies are directly supporting the manufacturing of guns and normalizing their use and turning once obscure knowledge like specific models and makes into everyday household lingo. Even going as far as saying realistic guns in games echoes the tobacco industry's entrance into candy cigarette manufacturing in order to get children thinking about smoking, priming them to become potential smokers later in life. There's been a direct link in the sales of BB guns when used in certain popular shooters. When the FAMAS debuted in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Cybergun, a French airsoft company, saw a direct spike in the sales of their BB equivalent, stating that now there was recognition with that particular kind of rifle with kids and teenagers. It's like giving a child a toy keyboard, then a spark for music creation is born. The responsibility is more on the parents, however, and their watchful eye over what their children consumes and toys they play with. Saying the NRA directly puts money into the pockets of game devs is a fairly unfounded claim, and would require a huge leap of logic, since gaming is the conservative media's greatest scapegoat for tragic events, and leading the charge consistently is the NRA. This is conjecture on my part, but after a series of mass shootings, on March 12, 2005 in Brookfield, Wisconsin, and then again on March 21st in Red Lake, Minnesota, then again on March 25th in 2006, in what seemed to be an attempt to clean up the still ongoing dirty image of guns, NRA Game Club was developed by Jarhead Games, a budget development team responsible for Middle Road outdoor and military gun games, and published by Crave for the North American release and 505 Games for the European release. Gun Club released to extremely poor reviews, and had gameplay consisting of just shooting different guns in a gun range at paper targets. Whether or not this was a cleaning of their image or a failed proving point that video games don't need to be violent remains to be seen. In 2012, NRA President Wayne Lapierre, who was acting president when Gun Club was released in 2006, stated that the games industry is a callous, corrupt, and corrupting shadow that sells and sows violence against its own people. Adding later, games are silent enablers, if not complicit co-conspirators. Rather than face their own moral failings, the media demonize gun owners. The NRA's hypocrisy is pretty easy to spot no matter where you stand, but it's pushed further by the fact that Gun Club's North American publisher, Crave, were responsible for such violent and corrupting games such as Bad Boys Miami Takeover and Trigger Man. So they weren't exactly doing their part to prevent the so-called video game violence epidemic. There is more to this than just the NRA and their underhanded support of the games industry. There's also the direct funding of gun manufacturers from big game companies in the form of licensing. When it comes to using a licensed product in any media, from film to video games, it's fairly safe to assume the team has paid for those rights. It's why you often see weird knockoff brands in lower production TV shows in order to avoid the legal ramifications. So why should guns be any different? In the race to create the most authentic modern military shooter, EA and Activision used their Battlefield and Call of Duty games respectively to push more and more realistic depictions of possible would-be wartime situations, soldier struggles, and the weapons they used. We can expect then that EA and Activision then got in contact with weapons manufacturers for the legal use of brand names. Other games, including 1998's Rainbow Six, developed by Red Storm Studio, founded by the late military author Tom Clancy, used an array of real-world and then modern guns such as the M16 and the Desert Eagle. On top of that, brands don't just like being paid for their likeness in media, they like positive representation. So if US soldiers committing acts of war against civilians with an M4 or any military-grade equipment available for public sale, it's not going to reflect that company's image very well by being associated with senseless violence. This is the reason you'll often see cheaper Russian or Chinese guns like the AK-47 carried by terrorist or enemy insurgents. Not only because they're a cheap, black market alternative that pose a real-world threat to gun sales, but they're not legal to own in the US. So only guns purchasable or best represented by media are available as default good guy weapons in a lot of American warfare-focused games. In Parkin's Eurogamer article, he cites an interview with Ronnie Barrett, creator of the Barrett M82 sniper rifle, where the gun creator coyly avoids stating any particular game developer he has a licensing agreement with, but then remarks you should check out the Call of Duty franchise. The Barrett M82 appeared in all 3 Modern Warfare games, as well as Black Ops 2. Activision Blizzard also gives special thanks to Colt, Barrett, and Remington in the Call of Duty credits. EA, never being a stranger to controversy, launched a shared marketing campaign with various gun manufacturing companies like Macmillan Firearms and Magpul to help sell Medal of Honor branded weapons in 2012 to raise money for a charity and promote the upcoming sequel Warfighter for the rebooted franchise, linking off various gun, knives, and combat equipment maker websites, with the proceeds going to military veterans. The campaign was promptly pulled following a wave of backlash, with EA retracting any links and ties to Macmillan and Magpul. No money was ever passed between EA for the use of gun names and the likeness of Medal of Honor. Everything was meant for charity. Where the story turns is that EA publicly announced that they were stepping away from gun makers and their licenses from then on out in order to appease the community reaction to the scandal, continuing to use gun, weapon likeness, and real names without paying the rightful owners, despite the fact that just a year earlier, Bell Helicopters and EA settled a court case where the games company had not paid for the likeness of the AH-1Z Viper, UH-1Y Venom, and V-22 Osprey aerial machines. The case was settled out of court with Bell's parent company Textron, claiming their creative First Amendment rights. But this raises further questions. Had EA ever paid for weapon likeness in games before publicly stepping back in order to give themselves a cleaner image? In an article by Kyle Orland in Ars Technica, he cites that a spokesperson for EA, Jeff Brown, told Kyle that no other EA game or service has used licensed gun images in a game. Why would EA pretend that they were paying licensing fees before publicly cutting those ties? Was it to bolster their brand in the wake of tragedy and controversy? Or simply a PR stunt to avoid further legal action like they saw with Bell Helicopters and Textron, using this as an excuse to further push their First Amendment rights? Are gun companies leaving the games companies alone now? Because in the rising sea of more realistic and modern shooters, it just turns into free advertising and priming for kids to get into guns, just like tobacco companies of days gone by. Or are AAA developers really funneling money into the pockets of arms manufacturers? Though most have understandably opted not to make a statement, the closest we can come to a definitive answer is a coy remark from Ronnie Barrett telling readers to check out Call of Duty. The only thing we can see for certain is there is a codependent relationship that's been cultivated, either on purpose or by complete accident. The fact remains that it's there and not going anywhere anytime soon.